Well, welcome everyone to this little panel about how to get your strategy game published. Very excited to talk to you this evening or day or morning, depending on where you are. And we have people from across Western Europe and the US with us. So maybe we just start by introducing ourselves a little bit. So my name is Anders Larsson. I'm the founder and CEO of Lightbulb Crew, and Firesquid is our publishing brand. And Firesquid is a publisher that is focused on strategy games, kind of across the board. And we have a few super interesting games coming out, and a few games also featured here at TactiCon. Tim, maybe introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I'm Tim Bender. I'm the CEO of Hooded Horse, publisher of strategic and tactical games, and very excited to be here with so many other people whose games I absolutely love.
And hi, I'm Tanya X Short. I'm the lead of Kitfox Games. We're primarily a game developer, actually, but if here at TactiCon, we're primarily going to be talking about the fact that we published Dwarf Fortress in the past year, and I guess for the rest of our lives. And also, we have the upcoming Mossfield Origins, which is a small snack-sized builder, and then we also have 6 Ages 2, which is a storybook survival strategy, building on the legacy of King of Dragon Pass and the first 6 Ages.
Cool. Adrian?
Hey, well, I'm Adrian. I'm in charge of marketing and publishing at Shura Games and Shura Unlimited, which is the publishing brand of Shura Games. We actually released quite a few strategy games, and we've been features at TactiCon last year and this year again. We did Northgard, War Tales, and more recently Dune Spice Wars. Well, War Tales released out of early access 2 weeks ago. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And yeah, it's glad to be here.
Thank you so much. So as I was, so this panel is about how do you get your strategy game published, and I wanted to start us off with a little bit why we are actually in publishing, and so you know, on a personal notice, on a personal level, well, obviously maybe as well as that's probably quite tightly linked to the companies as well, but maybe Tim, if you want to talk a little bit about you know, how you ended up being in publishing and what is interesting about it as a person.
You know, I think it's the opportunity to publish some game and work with developers and games that I myself love. These are the sort of games, strategic and tactical games, that I've always been a huge fan of. That actually, if you go back to my marriage announcement with my wife, it like has a big portion that talks about games we love playing together, and they are strategic and tactical games. So we just we absolutely love these sorts of games, and the games that we're publishing. You know, I noticed that I forgot in my intro to introduce any of them. I'm terrible at doing intros for myself, but games like Manor Lords, which is the background I have here, is from that, which is a city builder RTS hybrid in medieval ages. You know, it reminds me of games I loved when I was a kid. Lord of the Realms. Obviously, it's not really that at all, but it's the same time that feeling of being a medieval lord. And then Against the Storm, which is one that we released this past year, which is a roguelite city builder, and I absolutely love playing those games myself as well. So it's really just, it's kind of fun. I guess I became a publisher because I'm a fan of these kind of games, and it just seems really, really, really fun to work with them. And then at the end of the day, I feel like I did something good. You know, it's not just a job in a way. There's that larger part where I'm really happy with what I'm doing.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Tanya, you were a developer, right?
Yeah, it's pretty similar for us in that we were making games, and then it feels like when you're really excited about a game and you really want to help it succeed, you sort of end up naturally talking about publishing, because other than working on the game directly, how else do you help a game? Often, and even some publishers are specifically, you know, they talk about their particular services and other ways that they can help the developers really focus on the development. And for us, we started publishing actually just because of our side projects. We had a co-founder who was making a little mini strategy game. I don't know if you all have heard of the Shrouded Isle, but it's a cult management game where you sacrifice a villager every season. And our co-founder John Woo was making it on his weekends, and I was contributing it as a writer as well sometimes. But it just made sense for us to publish it as Kitfox because then that takes care of that answers various questions. It's a win-win for Kitfox, get something out of it because our community management gets to have more to discuss in between our releases, and then of course the developer gets to trust that a bunch of things will be taken care of that they don't have to worry about. And we moved on from there to more and more serious partnerships. But for us, it was always about the people we were working with. So far, we haven't signed any games that weren't already acquaintances or even in some cases close friends. So it's really been a matter of, hey, friend, do you need my help? Yes, okay, then let's work together. And I trust that they'll be honest with me if they feel like that's not working out for them. But yeah, so far we haven't ever signed a complete stranger. So there'll be a first time for everything. But that's our history is very much a result of my personal network.
Yeah, and I realized that actually the team, you're really the only pure publisher here, right? Adrian is of Shira Games and Lightbulb Crew. We're also developers. We started off as developers, and from my perspective, and I think it was similar from, I recognize a lot what you were saying, Tanya, is that, we wanted to communicate around our own games, and that meant that we had the communication department. And if you want to get really good at communicating, you have to do it a lot. And so that was part of the run up to why we wanted to do it. And then in the end, why I personally do it is exactly the same thing. Like the pleasure of working with people that want to create something and that you have all of that energy. And in my case, because our focus is we try to really help the developers really make the best game they can. And that is, even on a creative standpoint, but with the, with the services as to talk about. But a lot of it is in the end like helping, making sure that the teams really get the leverage that they out of us, of whatever they might need. It's like for some we're actually working with sound design, for some we help them just with the marketing, for some it is a more kind of cooperative development. And to me it's very cool because it goes directly into like why I'm developing games in the first place, and that is to, like, you are part of something, and at the end you have like the shining eyes of people that are playing it and want to do it more, and that is such a rewarding feeling. So, but Adrian, I think you personally came into it a little bit different, really, right? So
No, actually, the last part of your response really echoes to what we did. But basically, there are two reasons we started publishing. Shiro Games was already pretty successful. Northgard sold pretty well, and so we had the funds to start helping other developers and everything. But what we lacked, was the push. And I think the two factors that really played on this was first COVID, because well, more time, less events to organize and stuff like that. And the second one is people actually coming to us and asking, hey, how did you manage to do that? Do you have advice and this sort of stuff? So we just, recognized that we had some expertise to share, both in terms of publishing marketing, but also in terms of game design, artistic direction and everything. And that's actually how we envisioned the whole process. So Shiro Unlimited is not only a publisher marketing related, it's really something that you already mentioned, but it's kind of a whole package. If you need help in the design, if you need help in the development and everything, like we're there to help. And that this is really interesting in terms of strengthening the relationship with the developer, meeting. And I mean, I think everybody's agreeing on the fact that meeting people when everybody's agree, like loving the same type of games and everything. This is kind of the best part of the job, learning about new projects, seeing where the projects are going, and what they do when they release. That's something that really is super exciting in our line of work. And yeah, I think we needed, the fact of changing projects and having more variety in terms of genre and everything, because we're not like 100% focused on strategy games. The first one that we're releasing is actually a narrative experience, but and after that we're going back to city builders and so yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? Because especially when you start as a developer, I mean, a lot of times the expertise you've built is because you've self-published.
Yeah.
And so one of the first questions people often ask is, well, why did you self-publish? Why didn't you go to a publisher? And I mean, I think part of that is the trust that you have to have, but part of it is I'm curious to know if you all ever advise someone to self-publish. What your opinion is on that? I feel
Yeah,
like
definitely.
personally, I feel like if someone feels like they can, then they should. That would be my personal wish for them, is like, sure, like it's hard and it takes a lot of time and effort and energy, and it's a big risk, but like at the end of the day, you'll get to make all the decisions, and it's all you. And so you won't be able to blame anyone else, or you won't miss out on any learnings. And that's what I felt for when we first started self-publishing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's incredibly easy to get a very bad publishing deal out there right now. There are so many publishers out there, and a lot of times you're much better off self-publishing. And where you draw the line and when to decide to self-publish, Tanya, I think you hit it, you described it perfectly, because some people are going to hear the idea of doing everything themselves and having full control over it and think like, that's something I really want to do, and that's where I want to spend my time. Other people might hear that and think that's definitely not where I want to spend my time. So there definitely is an interest component, I think, to deciding where you want to spend your time. But I think that would be one major component, whether you're interested in doing that. Another major component would be your options, because to be perfectly frank, even if you have an amazing game, publishers aren't clairvoyant and oftentimes can fall into traps of being short-sighted. Maybe your game doesn't resemble something that's supposed to do well in the market because there's clear examples of other things. You have something more innovative, they're not recognizing the same value you are, and you're not getting the kind of offers that you like, and or from the kind of publishers that you would want to work with. Because I mean, I'll sound horrible saying this, but the truth is there are far, far more bad publishers than there are good. And you really have to look around there. Not in this panel though, because this is selected to the ones well, we all will vouch for each other, I think. But out there in the world, tons of people are starting up publishers. Tons of people aren't doing much for the games they publish. You really have to look for the ones, examine their track records, look for the ones who would be, worth working for, and then make sure that you working with. Sorry, not for. It definitely should be with, not for. If it's for, then it's probably a bad publishing deal. Working with, and then see the kind of offer you get, and then assess whether you really do want a publisher, because again, it is incredibly easy to get a bad publishing deal, and you don't want to get trapped in that.
So I agree with you, Tim. I think there are quite a bit of publishers out there that might not be super serious about, or they might sign something to sign something, and then not market it correctly and all that kind of stuff. But I am actually equally sad because I run into two games that I know for sure where they're just not, they weren't ready to do the work that is necessary to publish. And the reality is that if you don't, then for some people discovery is magical and it happens. For most, it's like you have to work for it. You have to struggle. You have to try 100 times to get the viral hits and all that kind of stuff. So I'm like the cases that I've run into, unfortunately, well, actually, it's three games that I was really excited about, and then they come out with a plop without the publisher, without actually getting that support. And while I do agree with you, Tim, that you should be careful and choose correctly, it's also true, like we run into teams that are so scared of being taken advantage of, and they believe that all publishers are evil. And if you're doing that, like you're not even it's very hard to kind of overcome that. So I think I agree with you. Like there are certain games that for sure can, and teams, I would say, even more than games that can for sure self-publish. If you see that you have that traction and you are doing the stuff and it's working. But you also should really think about what's the best for the game and for the studio. And in some cases, and I think even in many cases, the publisher route is the right route as well. I don't know, Adrian, have you run into?
It's actually like a question that we've been asked a lot. Like, should we self-publish? Should we ask for a publisher? And our answer is always the same. Don't judge some of the companies that were lucky at some point. We were extremely lucky. Like 2017 was a different time on Steam. There were, I think, 10 times less games released each year. So the competition was way lower, and we just got. We released, I think, 2 weeks after the new season of Vikings. So we released a Viking strategy game, and poof, it just like the hype went on. It was a good game though, but still, it was like luck definitely is part of the challenge, and you need to. I agree with Tim. You need to be ready to do the work, and if you don't have the resources internally or the fundings, because like marketing is not always cheap. It's important to consider the publishing solution. And I think it's also important to have a relative look on what people say about publishing activities today. Like I know that there've been a lot of abuse, and it's been pretty terrible in the last 2 years. But there are some good ones, I assure you.
True. I know at least 3 other than Fire Squid.
We're all going to be very nice to each other. Yeah, I mean,
this kind of links into a question as I had. Do you see any limitations or guidelines on when to absolutely seek a publisher potentially, or are there any limitations in, like, if games are very small, should they not seek a publisher, or if the budgets are very big, do any kind of limitations or guidelines for people that I fall in this bucket, I should definitely go and look for a publisher? It's kind of the inverse of Tanya's
I mean,
question.
the thing that comes to mind for me, based on the teams that I've talked to, is if you need money, you got to get it from somewhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be a publisher. You could find money from an investor or something, but like honestly, you got to get the money and you got to exchange something for it, right? So that suggests that you probably want a publisher. It's probably where to get some of the best value. The other case that I've seen is, especially in the current market, which is super noisy, super crowded, very nuanced. I would say if your team is not at least 4 people, maybe like if you're 1 or 2 people, it's going to be really hard. Like the amount of human hours you need to spend to work on discoverability, your game is just going to slow to such a crawl if 1 out of your 2 people are doing that. So when people are 4 or more people, I think it gets very nuanced. And if they don't need money, then it's really like I have a huge number of questions to sort of dig in and think, okay, well, what do you actually want? What do you actually need? What are you expecting? What are you fearing? What are you most worried about? What's your worst case outcome? Like all these sorts of things are part of it. But as soon as someone tells me they're 2 people, I'm like, okay, yes, I understand why you need a publisher 100%. There's no doubt in my mind that there will be some value there.
This is an interesting question. I think there are probably 2, broadly speaking, I think we're talking about 2 reasons to sign with a publisher. One reason is because you need a publisher. The necessary evil reason, I guess, would be the worst way to put it. But the other reason is that you think the publisher will add value and more value than they would take. And I think it's probably good to separate these in answering this question. So if we're thinking of the when do you need a publisher, I think that probably if you've if you've gotten to the point where you've created a decently far along playable build of your game, and you've taken the time to send out to influencers, like send them notes, look them up on YouTube, the ones that play similar ones, and you're not getting any traction with that, and you're not otherwise being picked up places, then for marketing purposes, Tanya already covered for funding purposes, but there's two reasons to go there. For marketing purposes, that may be time to start thinking a publisher is something that's needed. There's, on the other hand, the other category of things is when you think a publisher will add value even if they're not needed. And we've had a few of our games have been like this. Like Manor Lords had 550,000 wish lists before they signed with us as publisher, and they were quite aware they did not need a publisher. It wasn't a confusion on that point, and we were quite aware. And had we gone to them and said, it's really hard to get discovered on Steam these days, they would have laughed in our faces because like they're already 550,000 wish lists, which is it was top 20, I believe, at that time in the upcoming list. So, but they still ended up going with this. We have several games like that signed with us with over 50,000 wish lists. None with over 500,000 except for Manor Lords, but several others with over 50,000. And for them, it was never a need question. It was they thought we could add value. And I think that's honestly the best position to be in if you can get there. That is to be in a position where self-publishing isn't scary, where you can do it, where you've gotten your game to where you've had some success in marketing yourself, because at that point, the whole world of options is going to open for you. And anyone is going to be wanting to take the call and talk to you, and you can have your pick of any publisher. You can look for the kind of relationship you want, and you can know in forming that relationship that if it isn't what you want, you can just go self-publish because you don't actually need one. And so I think even if you're aiming for a publisher, your goal should be to aim to put yourself in a position where you could self-publish. You should still do all the same things in terms of like thinking about marketing and beginning to put the game out there and presenting it, because that's just going to put you in the best position to get the kind of publishing relationship you want, and to know that if it isn't, you have no need of going with it.
Well, there is one tricky, sticky part in there, though, is that in the part that you just said, where you put the game out there, you try to market it yourself, which is definitely part of the self-publishing path, whether or not you stay on it. That does undermine your negotiations with some publishers. And now we're only talking about strategy games for this panel, but for example, if you were to pitch your strategy game to Devolver, I have it on good authority, they would much prefer to be the ones who announce it.
Yeah.
And like a lot
I would
of
even
publishers
say like
feel that way.
Fire Squid as well, actually, in that like you get another area of control where you can, and I think this goes a little bit, Tanya, to your point, is like, do you have the people? And like, I would go with more like, do you have the people to do it well? Because we have had this in a game where we basically have to pull it from Steam and do a do over to make sure that it's done right with the right visual assets. Everything looks good, because it's easy to forget as well that whatever you release there out on the internet may last forever. And so if that first image that you release is not the sexiest or not the best, there might be months when if somebody hits my cool game on Google, they'll find an image that you're just not terribly proud of. And so we've had, so far it's been only once that we've actually pulled the game because we wanted to do it from the beginning and change the name and do a do-over. And I think you're absolutely right. Certain publishers will just even go so far as just not to do it. Like unless sure, if you get to 550,000 wish list, but then you already did something right. This is my point. Like, do you feel confident that you will do it right? So
yeah, I mean, I think these are good points. I think that we've got right now unannounced games from very experienced developers who were, we signed the publishing agreement before announced. We're very glad to have it before announced. I would actually agree that for all games, theoretically, abstractly, we would prefer to have it and do the announcement ourselves. The truth is, I think that it's a weird situation where the ability to get a good publishing deal before you've announced the game and shown some traction, in some sense, depends on some pre-existing relationships or record. And if you've got that, then you can do it. But the I do think it's harder for people who are, if this is their first game or something, oftentimes, especially if they don't have, like there's a model for someone who can get a good publishing deal before announcement. It's like industry veteran who did this. So they're, even if they're forming a new company, it's, the larger teams, it's those sort of things. So I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that it can be very valuable to do it. I mean, in some cases, maybe try to get published before announce and then do it. I do think it can become hard for new teams though to arrange that.
That's true. Most of the people watching this panel probably this is their first time trying to get their strategy game published, and it's true that I agree that if you're a new unproven team, even if you've worked on many cool titles, if this is the first time you're working together, that is a huge risk. Like even for us, we we sign our friends or whatever. But if it's a new team, it's a title that hasn't been announced, I have to go completely based on our expertise. I can't have any market information there to help me understand like what are people connecting with, what do I think happened to this trailer that didn't do very well, that sort of thing.
I think this. I don't know, Adrian. What you guys at Shira are doing.
Well, no, I agree with pretty much everything that was being said. I was just going to add something about the risk, and I think it's important as a personal level, to consider for you and your team that self-publishing is a way bigger risk than publishing with a publisher, because most of the financials will rely on yourself. If the game reimburse 10% of what you put in it, it's going to be a problem for everybody and not just yourself. So that's something that needs to be considered. We were in the actually in the position not too long ago of saying, yeah, you should self-publish, because it was a solo dev who started his dev diary on Reddit, and the things just picked up. And he got the wish list. I think it was 60 or 70,000 just by speaking to people on Reddit. And I mean, this would have been a shame to have a publisher, kind of taking part of the revenues of the game. But I guess that would be for me the only case where going with the publisher could be excluded from the beginning. And I think it's always has to be a consideration, even if it's only for safety and funding security. Yeah.
I think you could even expand that a little bit to say, like, if you're a game that is that seems like a small budget game that has good traction, then a publisher is probably completely useless. Because there's a big limit. If it's a small game, it's a big limit to what you can do with marketing. At least this is I might be. It's probably not 100%, but
I guess it also depends on what you call a small game.
Yeah, yes, for sure. But if you're like your solo dev example, I think it would be unusual that a solo dev type game will warrant, hundreds of thousands of euros or dollars in marketing spend. I guess there could be. I'm sure that it could be alternatives, but I think also this is a little bit so. It depends on when also like the question we were talking before. Also depends on when you sign the games. So we have some games that we have signed actually on the presentation. Nowadays we sign mostly on a decent build, but we if we see this is also like the problem, like if you are a game that has been out on Steam for a bit and you don't have traction yet, we actually have to ask ourselves questions. Okay, why is that? Is it a marketing miss, or is it something inherent in the game that makes it not do well? And so there is this level of risk as well. Again, I'm coming back to, do you have the team to do it well? Do you have a team that can frame the screenshots right and like actually pull out the essence of your game when you're getting it on Steam and when you're getting your communication out? It's super tricky, and it's. I would reach out. I would personally, if I were a smaller developer, I would try to reach out early to publishers, and because publishers also become kind of like almost like a focus group. they will tell you what they like and what they don't like, and you can get a sense of, like, in a sense that's actually lower risk, because if you fix that and you can reach out later and it looks great and now everything is fantastic, then the publishers might say yes. I would start first with publishers myself, to be honest.
I'll say that as a developer, that almost ruined one of my projects. We reached out very early with Boyfriend Dungeon to a bunch of publishers, and now this was a different time. I think there's more publishers now that would probably understand what to do with that pitch. But it, maybe it created that knowledge. I don't know. But back in 2017, when we were showing the one-pager of Boyfriend Dungeon to a bunch of publishers behind closed doors, they were all like, "We don't get it. This name is weird. Who is this for? What is this?" And so we were like, "Oh no, we thought it was obvious. We thought it was amazing. What's happening?" Like, we actually had like this moment of like self-doubt, and that was why we launched the Kickstarter, because we were like, are we crazy? Like, why doesn't anyone understand this? And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying that, like, yes, you should absolutely take publishers' expertise seriously, and they're probably identifying risks, whether like that maybe you're not seeing about your game. If like you're showing it to them and they're like, just keep in mind it's to a publisher's benefit to sort of keep the relationship positive. So I call it the Hollywood yes. I hate it. This is what I hate the most about anything in business, but it's so common in publishing. And I'm even semi-guilty. I try not to, but you can't resist it sometimes, where someone shows you something and honestly, you're not sure. You're like, I don't know enough about this. I don't have the time to spend hundreds of hours like digging into it. And so I'm just going to say, that looks great. Keep me updated in the future. When really what the publisher should be saying, if they're being completely honest and open and transparent, is that I don't understand how this is going to relate to an audience. I don't know where it's going, or there's these factors or variables that could ruin, like, it could be great or it could be not. It sort of depends on all these nuanced things, and I don't have the time for this. This is basically what a lot of publishers are going to tell you in their, it's a little too early for us. Keep us updated. And what they're really saying is, I don't really trust everything about this yet, but I'm not willing to sort of be completely transparent about it. And that can be really stressful, and it can take up a lot of it can be really exhausting as a developer to get that kind of response back. You feel like this foggy distance between you. And that's why building a relationship is a better way to think about it. Like, really thinking about, like, taking them to coffee, like, ask them to be brutally honest. Like, what do you see is like maybe a problem here? And maybe they're going to say something, if you're ready to hear that. If you're in a creative space where you can hear, I'm worried you can't execute this art direction, or I'm worried that the writing is going to fall down, or I'm worried that this is too close to this other game that's going to do it better. If you're not in a headspace where that is like useful to you, then like don't ask. But if you're like ready and you're girded, you have your armor on, and you're like, okay, I'm legit ready to have an honest conversation about this product, then I think building a relationship with publishers is an amazing focus group. Just keep in mind that their tastes are still individual gatekeepers, and they have a specific expertise. So like asking us about strategy games, we're necessarily going to be informed by what's already out there. Some of us are more imaginative than others, and like in different ways. Like, if you're gonna pitch me a dating strategy game, like, I am there, but like I don't know that much about grand strategy Europe history necessarily, right? So it really depends on who exactly you're talking to, and just remember that they're also people.
Yeah. I think you're muted, Anders.
That's sorry about that. No, I think it's a super good point, Tanya, and I would even go further. But I would actually be a little bit prescriptive. Don't get in touch with publishers unless you really want to know what's good and bad about your game, and like really dig into it. If you're in that headspace where you're just going to do it, and do it in that case. And there are absolutely situations where people just don't get what you're trying to do, and you might be completely right. And you have all of these other tools. You have Kickstarters. You have these other ways of like getting validation or invalidation. I need, there are lots of different approaches of doing it that it goes outside. But if you are reaching out to publishers, you should really see it as use them to dig into what they get and what they don't get. And if they don't get it, maybe there's a good reason, or maybe they're stupid. But you need to dig into understanding why.
Maybe like one small thing, like when you're saying that you should go and talk to publisher early, when you're ready and everything, the game has to be understandable. I completely agree with Tanya. Sometimes it's super difficult to say no to somebody, maybe just because the reason is unknown for you. You feel like there's something in the game, like the perspective, the pitch, the association of gameplay loops kind of works, but it's not complete enough. There's no visual aid. I mean, usually today publisher will go with the project unless the team has an amazing track record of a lot of successful games and everything. They will need at least a build, at least a technical demo to assess whether the game has some potential or not. But I think that if you don't have a build but you just have a presentation and you still want some feedback from publisher, you should at least have a good pitch deck. But when I say good, it's not compelling or appealing or anything. It's just covering everything that you think makes your game a unique piece of development, art, and game design. Like render targets are something that is so rare in pitch decks, and we do receive quite a lot of pitch decks, and it's so important to just have an idea of what you want your game to look like in the end, and that's something that I think it has to be taken into account. And the last thing I'm going to add on this subject, I think it is about your what you're looking for when you reach out, and you just say your company X, the publisher, as a title of the email. It's not very understandable. Like you a lot of people come to us asking for guidance, and we read the pitch as if they were a team ready to sign, like, okay, we are now ready, and that it's not the case, and this is not specified in the email or in the title and this sort of stuff. So you need to be clear enough, so that the publishers say, okay, the pitch looked good, but it's not yet ready, and oh, actually they just wanted to have some feedback. Okay, we can start a discussion, and this is where things will please call me back when you have more is actually truthful and honest, is when you really want to follow the project and see where things are going, but still it's really not possible right now to sign anything based on because there's no demo or this sort of stuff.
Thanks, Adrian. I actually I want to take a quick break and try to fix my lighting because the sun is done.
Sure.
So give me 1 minute, and Luis, maybe we can find a way to cut this out.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, you went from like broad afternoon, like golden hour into darkness, like instantly. It only took like what, 20 minutes? That's amazing.
Yeah. That's
I guess it's been an hour.
Yeah.
but I feel rather rapid.
The dog is snoring in the background. I hope
Can't
it's
hear
not.
We can
Okay,
hear
nice.
it.
I have construction as well. Can you hear it?
Nope.
No.
Okay.
You're good. Sorry. At least I think you can see me now for a little bit at least. So.
Yes.
Yep.
It has
All
never
right,
been free to anyway.
So okay, so all of these are like super good points, and actually, a lot of it comes down to like we can actually prescribe the when and the hows and all of that kind of stuff. But for sure, I think there are some things that paves the way for a good relationship between a publisher and the developer. And so I wanted to maybe hear what you guys are thinking, and like pull from the experiences that you've had. Like, so what are some of the how do you establish like a good working relationship with your developer? And anyone want to go first?
Sure. So I think that, it's interesting because Tanya, you mentioned that a lot of the games that you've signed have been your friends previously. So I'm sure that starts it off right away on a great footing. We've had a similar experience where a lot have been either our own, basically directly friends with us, or have been friends with friends, and someone recommended them, which I think always starts it off kind of nicely to have that introduction. And they know a little bit about us, and they sort of know a little bit how we work, and that always gets it off to a good start. I think once it's going, I think transparency is the number one thing from both sides, and honesty. So basically, I love it when developers are very open and upfront about their situation, what they need, here's the thing: is it's interesting to say that, because you'll definitely find advice that when pitching a publisher, what you should do is basically inflate whatever you're asking for money up into this, into the stratosphere, and make sure you do this. And then also you have a slide which is like, oh, market comparisons. It's like best case, medium case, worst case, and the worst case is one of the best selling games that you'll find out there. So that's a strategy. I think that it works a lot better though when everything is just from the beginning, just sort of honest and open in the discussion. About what you need, what you want, what you're looking for, how the publisher works. Transparency in terms of the publisher, just like if you want to speak to developers that have worked with the publisher, that you can name the developer and the publisher will introduce them to you. Once the relationship gets going, and if it goes in the right direction and you guys sign, I think, we have, like, in our Slack, we've got channels for the developers to all talk to each other and stuff. And I think having that sort of openness and transparency and the ability to sort of just get in there and start talking to people, I think that helps out a lot. I think that also knowing who you're going to meeting in advance, who's going to be working with you, can be important. This isn't so much a concern with smaller publishers. Like, I think with all of us, this probably isn't that much of a concern, because the people you're talking to during the signing process are probably the people you're going to be working with. But if you're pitching to larger publishers, I think make sure that you're not just meeting like the people who are doing the scouting and onboarding it, but make sure you're meeting the people who you're going to work with on a day-to-day basis. Find out, who are you going to work with? What are the people at that publisher? And they should be able to tell you, oh, you work with this person who handles this person handles this. Meet them before signing, make sure that relationship is going to be good. And I think just generally throughout all of this, having a feeling that, both sides are being open with each other, and it's not some sort of a highly formalized adversarial sort of like relationship from the start, because it starts out there, it's going no place good in the end.
Yeah. And it's I agree, it's super safe to start, and especially when you start your publishing activity, to go with a friend. So the Decarnation, the first game that we're releasing, is actually one of my I used to do teaching, and we were teachers in the same school. And one day he say, hey, can you give me some advice on the Steam page? I'm like, oh yeah, the game look amazing. Do you want me to show it to my boss? Like, yeah, okay. And that's how we signed it. See, and I guess for everybody, it kind of put us in a position where we already trusted each other, and it helps a lot in terms of understanding. Like, when he tells me like the team can make these changes before launch, I know that he's not telling me that, and that the Switch release is going to be difficult. So it's pretty. It's safe in the both ways. It's good for them because for developers, because the transparency is important, and especially and this is an advice to publisher that listen. I don't know if there will be a lot, but still, be transparent on the contract, because developers are often very frightened by this step, and it's super important to make them understand exactly what they're signing. It's If you're honest with yourself and with your contractor, you should be honest with the developers. And honesty work both ways. So it's pretty nice to honesty and transparency. It's nice to be able to trust each other.
I completely agree. The only thing that I'd add as an extra step, I guess, when you're in the midst of finalizing talking to a publisher, or even before, like when you're deciding who you're pitching and who you're seriously hoping will pick you up or something like that, is really write down, like, what are your best and worst scenarios? Like, what fills you with fear to think about? What fills you with hope? What fills you with excitement? And like, being honest about that in some ways can be important. And it's not just that you're hiding it, it's that you just never thought about it out loud. Like, you just had these expectations, you never realized it. And I think it can really help to just take a minute, take a day, and like think, what are my expectations? What are my baseline? Like, how often do I expect the publisher to talk to me? How often do I want to check in? How often do I want them to send a newsletter? Like, just all these things that are like, get as concrete as you can about what you feel like will be a good job from the publisher and what won't, because you might have very different expectations. And once you've signed the contract, even like, it's probably not in there. All this kind of stuff is just floating out in the ether of expectations. But it's very easy to understand if you have different expectations beforehand, and afterwards when you're already working together, it's much more of a compromise of like, okay, well, I guess you wanted to do it this way and I wanted to do it this way, and now we have to find something that makes us both happy. Whereas if you'd known from the beginning, like, oh, I didn't realize you really wanted weekly updates, and I'm going to have to and who's providing the gifts, who's taking the screenshots, who's doing the this and the that and the other, and like just making sure that everybody is on board with how that process works will make the next couple of years of your life much easier. And what happens after launch? Who keeps marketing it after launch? Who has the final say on the different discounts and the different platforms? And like, is it up to you whether it goes on GOG.com or blah blah blah? Like, all that kind of stuff is one side might be thinking they're doing the other side a favor by taking it off their plate and taking care of it, and the other might be like, no, 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 I really deeply care about this. I want to take care of it because it's important to me, or I'm opinionated about this. You might not even realize what you're opinionated about until you start thinking through all the steps. So just taking a moment to outline your expectations and hopes, even if you're like, I don't care about this. What do you think? Like, that's a totally fair, transparent thing to ask a publisher.
So we actually have a specific process. Like, every game that we sign, we go through and do a workshop together that includes both marketing and production and as many of the dev teams as it makes sense. So in all games except one that we've signed so far, we did this process. In the other one, it was such a small team that it was very easy to kind of get aligned anyways. And we do that so that everybody's actually aligned. It's like a workshop around the game. It starts with a workshop around the game. Who is it for? What are like the key features? What are the unique selling points? And we work through that so that at the end of that, at least at that point, we all share the same view of what the game is supposed to be and who it's for. And that really helps everyone in understanding, everything from marketing, but also like even to the extent like as you're developing your game, you will end up, you'll end up having to make choices. Like, do I need to do this feature rather than this feature? And if you know for who this game is actually for and what the impact of that feature will be on this person, it's so much easier to choose. And you can say, okay, yeah, this is really important, and this other stuff we can do if we get the time to do it, which is usually never, right?
Yeah, I mean,
that usually doesn't happen. But
like,
that is something that has really worked super well for us, and that is also the same time where we do like all the expectation setting that you were talking about, Tanya. Like, everybody knows, like, who the different people on the team, including the dev team, who are we gonna go to get screenshots and GIFs and whatever? Are we gonna do that? How are we gonna work with QA and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I was just going to say that even if you end up with a publisher where, I understand completely giving a slightly inflated budget, especially if there's recoup involved, which not all of us recoup. Big applause for Hooded Horse not recouping. Great job. They're excited about that development. But I feel like, especially after you've signed and it's like a marriage. Like, you're together until you decide to put in a lot of effort to break it apart. Once you're in it together, it may be embarrassing. Like, you might want to, oftentimes these relationships start from a perspective where the developer is sort of trying to impress the publisher. They're trying to make the publisher trust them. They're trying to display super competence. They're like, yes, I can do this. I'm firing on all cylinders. I'm the best developer. And like, I understand, like, that makes sense because you're asking the publisher to, invest in you, and that's great. But that can be a really difficult starting point to then be super transparent and vulnerable. But you have to understand that the sooner you can get your relationship to that point, the sooner they can help you. Like even if you're dealing with the most sharky, the most, I don't know, messed up publisher, you ended up with a publisher that's like a giant corporation and you have no idea who you're talking to every day. Like you still need, I think, to be super transparent with them about like, this is the reality of what these humans are going through, because you're already married to them. Like once you're married, like you gotta be honest. Like this is behind for this reason. This person's sick. This person, they're slower and we don't know why, but that's just reality now and we have to deal with it together because like they're your partner, and like maybe you married not the love of your life. And it's not like a marriage because it's gonna end, you know, your game's gonna come out and you're gonna go move on to the next one and et cetera, but like really, if you weren't willing to be yourself with them, you shouldn't assign them. So now that you've already signed them, like just commit to get the most out of them that you can. Like that's to your benefit in the future.
So it's so true, and it's also important. It's hard for, I think, for many developers, they feel like they might feel dependent on the publisher and so on for good reason, right? In that case, maybe the publishers are paying them every month or at milestone, whatever. But the fact is that the publisher is also completely dependent on the developer. And it's just, if the game is late, yeah, that's bad for the developer, but it can be all equally bad for the publisher. And so this is like having that understanding, the basic understanding, like it is a codependent relationship at that point. It's not necessarily always good. It's just the reality of it, right? Like especially if you're working with a smaller publisher, like if you're working with a bigger publisher like EA and they invested, 100,000 euros in your game, yeah, they don't care. They literally don't care. I think everyone around this table actually does care, even if it's a smaller game, because this is what we do. We don't want to deliver. I wouldn't accept releasing a bad game. It would be terrible for us as a publisher, for our brand, for the people that we want to play our games in the future. So we are like super dependent. The developer is dependent on the publisher, but the publisher is also equally dependent on the developer. Once you get to that balance, it is actually a more balanced relationship than many developers believe, in the sense that we are, in each other's lap, basically.
And it's really not uncommon to see the publisher go outside of what it's supposed to do in the contract. I mean, like we've helped studios recruiting because they felt that they needed, some help in, game design, this sort of stuff. Like if you have troubles with your animations, and you can definitely contact the publisher, who will make the decision to add a bit more money on the table without touching the revenue share, just so that your animator doesn't burn out before the end of the production. This is definitely something that happens a lot, and even if it's not in the contract.
For sure.
We're coming up on an hour. I wonder if we should start the
Yeah. So
final
maybe
segment.
we want to talk a little bit about some specific. We already talked a little bit about some advice but if we some of the key things, I think you mentioned this earlier, Adrian, about pitches, and what would you advise? Would you advise developers when it comes to pitching and pitches? Maybe even who to pitch to. I'll leave it quite open, but yeah, around the whole subject of pitching.
You want me to start, or I
Yeah,
can?
sure. You already
Like,
started, so go, keep
yeah,
going.
I think first is to keep your head on your shoulders. Maybe saying that your 8-people team doing a open world RPG with a fully customizable environment, and if you with dynamic narration in less than a year, it's not going to be very trustworthy with the developers. So try to be sure about what you're asking, and being able to have a good idea of what you're pitching and to whom. We already talked a bit about this, but publishers, I really think that every type of game can be published by a publisher, but not every publisher can publish every type of game. So do your homework and try to understand which publisher can work on which kind of game. Like we wouldn't do visual novels, for example, or hardcore FPS, this sort of stuff. This is not really in our DNA. But it's something that like some people came to us with FPS and saying yes, but there's a twist, and if the twist fits, why not? Why not? I mean, um, yeah, before playing Against the Storm, like a roguelite city builder, that wasn't really no, so roguelite RTS wasn't really something that I would have expected, and still it works pretty well. So yeah, that kind of thing. And globally, be uh, confident enough in your idea um, that, I mean, it's more that if you're not confident enough about your idea, is that it's that you're not ready to go see a publisher. You really have to be certain that yeah, it's in the best state possible to go see a publisher, because you need funding, because you need to move to the next step, and you need a publisher to move to the next step. That's what I mean. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Tim, any suggestions, tips about pitching to people?
So I think I'll go ahead and be the horrible person here and talk about publishers you shouldn't pitch to. So I think there are basically two basic kinds of publishing approaches out there, and luckily all four of us here in this panel, I think, are of the same approach where we care about each individual game, as was mentioned earlier. And it would be a disaster for us to have an individual game fail. And we're going to do everything we can to support that, because our goal is consistency. Our goal is everything works well. Our goal is having that reputation. It's actually it's not purely altruistic. It's partially strategy. We want to have that
It's
reputation.
not at all altruistic.
Yeah.
In no way altruistic.
Yeah, it's in our interest that we're building a trust with consumers, that they know they can rely on the quality. We're building a trust with developers. They know they can rely on us doing our job. But there is another kind of publisher, which is, I think, honestly, is more numerous out there, especially among recently started ones. And that is what the opportunistic kind of publisher that honestly thinks they're playing venture capitalists, and their goal is to sign a bunch of games, and they're just looking at, okay, well, if one goes a hit and does really, really well, then that can make up for all of the games that didn't make back their money, and the developers, especially if there's recoup terms, the developers are trapped under. But just in general, all the developers who didn't make anything, that's okay to them, because their strategy is, I'm going to sign a bunch of things and I'm going to see if one does well, and then I'm going to be okay, because the one that does really well is going to pay for the other ones. But that is a terrible thing for the vast majority of developers that sign for them. It has no future in terms of building their reputation with consumers. It's I think it's ultimately a really bad approach from a business perspective too. But regardless of what I think, they're pretty convinced that they're right about doing that. And frankly, there are a ton of those opportunistic publishers. And when they approach you, the approach is always going to be pretty much the same formula. It's going to be, we have a combined X number of years of experience across industry-leading companies like A, B, and C, mixed with we've published, and they'll list like the 2 games that went well. And the problem is most of them didn't. So what you want to do when you're looking at a publisher and deciding whether you want to work with them is go to their Steam publisher page, look at the review counts of their games, look for consistency. Go to websites like VG Insights, and although the estimations aren't perfect, they're actually quite often, in some cases, they're still within like an order of magnitude, and see like what is the pattern here? What is the median performance? Don't look for the maximum performance. Don't look for the hits. Look for the median performance. Look for the minimum, the bottom ones as well. Look into those games. What happened? I mean, it's not a publisher's fault if a game fails always, but it can be, especially if it's consistent. Contact the developers they work with. Don't just contact the developers who had the biggest hits in the publisher's portfolio, but really dig into sort of like, I mean, a publisher's performance, if they're doing a good job, should show itself in the median, and should show itself in the bottom half as well. And frankly, a lot of times the biggest hits have less to do with the publisher. So really dig in there and try to figure out, is this a publisher who cares about each individual game succeeding and who's going to like look out for you in the worst case scenarios? Or is it a publisher who's just going to cut their losses and run and reinvest in the game that makes the most money, because all they're really concerned about is the end number when they aggregate all the successes and failures? Because you don't really want to work with that kind of publisher. It's okay. So there, I've been the bad guy, but
if I can add,
I'll add a point to that as well. Maybe, sorry, Adrian, but I'll add people that are not willing to make an investment in your game as well. Like that is they'll just take 30%. They'll do all the marketing, but they're not necessarily willing to put any money up front.
Well, you've actually described our deals. So we're probably over half of our deals are marketing localization only.
In that case, you have to think about differently in terms of like what the contracts look like compared to. But I would say, and like in your case, you do have a track record of having done this correctly. I know a bunch of games that, and I think that in many cases those are kind of the horror stories. They signed off their games, to do the marketing for a revenue share, and in the end the guys just didn't do anything, and they have no downside because they didn't make a commitment to do that. But for example, an alternative could be like you can make the commitment, like at least contractually, in terms of how much money they should spend in marketing and stuff like that. You can regulate that as well. So that is also perfectly fine, but that is a commitment. But if there's not a contractual commitment of money or time spent or whatever, the risk is if your game is not selling itself by itself, they're just going to roll on to something else, and they have no downside from it. So don't make those kinds of contracts.
On that subject, if I can add one little tiny thing, it's just don't hesitate to ask the contact info of other games that the publisher worked with.
Sure.
And if the publisher doesn't want to give out this contact, it smells bad.
Yeah. And honestly, if the contract has a non-disparagement clause, I'd be a little careful, because if you have a non-disparagement clause, I should say, I was a lawyer. So a non-disparagement clause means a clause in the contract that says that you're not allowed to say anything bad about the relationship with the publisher. Personally, I don't think those should be in there, because you should be able to get full information. And if they're and the thing to bear in mind is that you have a non-disparagement clause, the other developers who signed with them have a non-disparagement clause, and that colors things.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, think through your worst case. Like, some of it is if the publisher does badly by you, like, think through that reality, and what trust you're putting in them that won't happen. But even more so, like, what if it's in a year from now you need more money, or you go over budget, you go over time. How are you going to handle that together? Like, walking through those expectations together is also really important. And even in your pitch, like, this is part of how you're building your pitch, is just understand that when you pitch the publisher, they will already be thinking, so what if they're late? What happens when they're late? Like, what gets cut? What gets scoped? Does it actually come out later? Like, and so even if you're not necessarily building it explicitly into your pitch, if you already know what the answer is for if and when things are delayed, because video games are often delayed, that'll help those conversations go smoother, because even if the publisher doesn't they don't want to insult you and be like, so what happens when you're late? They can still sense how you're going to address those problems if and when they come up. And I was just going to add 2 personal notes. One, just understand that a lot of this advice, I mentioned gatekeepers. We're trying to do our best. We're trying to help the industry and the art form, but you can see we're all kind of white, and I'm the only woman here, and like we are of a limited perspective. So like, if you're a person of color, if you're marginalized, you're trans, understand that what you're making, you should still be super confident in yourself, even if you feel like the world is against you and like people don't understand you. Like, in some ways, like, a lot of our advice is, be confident, like, be yourself. And it can feel really hard to do that when you're a marginalized person, but it's even more important. It's even more important. And even though it's harder to like look inside yourself and really think like, no, like this excites me, and that's real. And that part of yourself is what's going to help you and your game stand out even more. So like, I don't know how to tell you how to do this. I know it's harder than it is to say, but like absolutely try to tunnel into that confidence and just tell yourself how amazing you are, because that's what the normal looking developer is doing all the time anyways. And then my second personal.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. No. You can add on. I just had one more little.
No, I just
little.
wanted to add on it. Like, when you pitch, show that you're passionate about your game, or show that you're passionate about the stuff that you're creating. It makes, and then like it makes it more fun to participate. Being pitched at when somebody really believes in what they're doing, and they're like, you can see how they're burning for this, because you wouldn't be pitching me anyways, but if that shines through like that, intense passion you have for your project, it's just a huge, like, it gives me a much more confidence that you'll try to do anything to actually get this thing shipped. It's not rocket science. Everybody, you would say that about, but it, and even more so nowadays, like a lot of pitches are actually done over Zooms or at the distance, right? Like nowadays, I would say there's a minority of pitches that you actually see each other physically. Project that passion through that screen. It's really super helpful.
Yep, agreed.
So,
And then
yeah, go ahead.
I just had one tiny piece of pitching advice, which is an internal thing, not to do with the actual act of pitching, but just think about your long term and like how you want to be making the next game, because I think that is also part of the equation of how you're going to handle the publishing and the funding and the aftermath of this game. And my dream for the industry is that there's more and more indies making multiple games, not just making one and then disbanding and then making another one and then disbanding. And so having that long-term plan of how, even if your publisher doesn't care about what your next game is, like you should. And so like planning for that eventuality, regardless of how this first one does, is something that I hope you still maintain, even though the publisher, whether or not they're interested in that is secondary. But I want that for you.
So if I could add just a small bit to this, it's we're talking constantly about pitches as a very formal thing here. The truth is, actually, when I look back at our portfolio, I think 95% of the games that we've signed have not formally pitched us, as in we had no pitch deck, which may not be usual, but it's where we ended up. And instead, a ton of them actually went through people who got to know me over Discord. And we chatted a little bit in some Discord, and they reached out, or got to know some other member of our team through some other means. And if, the truth is, if, some people are really just like, they're all about creating that, VC like pitch deck that looks perfect. But if that's not you, or you're not comfortable doing that, like, just, I think there's opportunities to get to know people through other means, and to reach out a little bit and test the waters a little bit and make yourself more comfortable. And then just, and then bring it up when you feel comfortable with it. It's also sometimes a good test, like how is it when you're not someone that the publisher is trying to sell to? Because, when you actually do get in that pitch, it's both sides selling each other a little bit. Maybe there's another context you could get to know the person. Maybe you could, maybe there's some mutual person that you could ask to do an introduction just to ask them a few questions, or maybe you can just get in touch with them over, like I said, Discord or something like that, rather informal, a member of the team, because it doesn't have to all be a formal pitch. And maybe that's not something that you're as comfortable with.
I think these are all great advice, and I want to be respectful about everybody's time. And so, how about we finish this little panel with just like one last kind of comment, conclusion, whatever you want to say. We go around the table and start and do it that way. And so, does that sound good? Adrian, do you want to start with your kind of final words, conclusion, final wise advice?
That's hard task. No, I mean we've covered pretty much everything regarding pitches and the relationship once the game is. I think that there will be a lot of times some rules on the contractually or just a courtesy, where once you've already released a game with the publisher, they will ask you to have a first regard rights on your next title. it's something, you know, to know. I don't have any opinion on this. I just think it's a nice touch to, if you had a good relationship with a publisher, to you know, allow them the first regard on your next title, even if it's not for them. And in that case, they will say, okay, that's not for them, for us. And also, I was really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Well, Tanya?
Yeah, this was a lovely panel. Thank you, Anders. I just want to say, if anyone out there is making a deeply simulated procedural experience, whether it's a sandboxy thing or a deeply, you know, Dwarf Fortress-y RPG kind of thing, let me know. I'll be here. I'm all over the internet. You can find me. Fox might want to talk to you.
Tim?
Well, it's been so great to be here and talk to everyone. I think that one thing that should show through with this panel is that there really isn't just one publisher you should be talking to. So, we've gathered 4 here that we all, get along enough, or at least we'll publicly say we think you should talk to us. But the point is, there are actually others out there too. And generally speaking, in being a good advocate for yourself, you want to reach out in a lot of directions, because as much as like every publisher has something unique to offer, it's sort of like, applying to colleges or something. Like, yeah, there's unique things, but there's also a lot of opportunities, and you don't know which one's going to be best for you or which one's going to have the best fit for your situation. So definitely go out there, research the opportunities you have. If you're looking for publishing, go out there, apply broadly, talk to people. Don't also decide that your game won't be of interest to certain publishers based on like they're too big or prestigious. Like, don't rule yourself out. Don't decide, well, I'm just starting indie dev, so I can't pitch, insert the name of whatever favorite famous publisher that you like. No, give it a try, because it doesn't hurt you to send an email, and just get as many things open as possible so you can explore your options, and then be thinking about, should self-publishing be an option to compare to these as well? Because in the best situation, that's an option that you should think about as an additional one to compare whatever you're getting from whatever publishers.
Great points. On my own, I would say people in video game industry are surprisingly nice and want to help out. And it's easy to forget when you're sitting there by yourself and, do I dare to contact this person, or yes, you dare, and they will not be pissed off either. They might not respond because they have too much other things going on and all that kind of stuff. And this happens to me, or I this is not top of mind, and I might just miss it in the craziness of the everyday. But I would never be if I do have the time, I will try to help out. I'll even get you have a look at your deck and tell you if I like it or not, whether you want to pitch me or not. So people are surprisingly nice in this industry, and like, don't forget it. And that means that you can reach out to people, anyone basically, and ask for advice. You might not get the response, but in many cases you will, and it's almost always worth it. And then I also I do have to add a little spiel for Fire Squid. So if you do look for somebody that can help you work in partnership with you to make your game as good as you can be, and help you sell it, Fire Squid is here, and and we take such pleasure out of working with people that want to, create pleasure with other people, for other people. This is all what it's all about. I want to thank you guys for participating, and I hope we see each other soon as well. And thank you for those of you that listened, and don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us and or our companies. We're happy to help you find the right publisher for your game. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.